When he came back, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought the moment I saw his face again, all those years of silence would crash over me like a wave. But they didn't. He just stood there, at the edge of my porch, looking almost the same, just a little older, a little quieter around the eyes. The same half smile, the same hands in his jacket pockets like he never knew what to do with them. And I stood there, holding the screen door open, my heart strangely still. For a second, time folded. I wasn't 47 anymore. I was 28 again, waiting by the window for him to come home from work, praying he'd still love me the way I loved him. But that girl, the one who waited, she wasn't here anymore. He cleared his throat. "Hi, Claire," he said softly. 2 simple words, 2 words I used to dream about hearing again. I nodded. "Hey, Daniel." The wind moved between us, carrying a faint scent of rain and lilacs from the garden I'd planted last spring. He looked around like he didn't recognize the place, even though he helped build this porch before he left. "I was in town," he said, glancing at the ground. "Thought I'd stop by." I smiled faintly, polite, almost detached. "You always did like surprises." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something heavy in his voice. Something that said, this isn't just a visit. For years, I used to imagine what I'd say if he ever came back. I rehearsed it in my head 100 different ways. Sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes begging him to explain why. But now that he was standing right in front of me, I didn't feel any of that. No anger. No desperation. Just a calm, almost peaceful ache. I invited him in. Not because I had to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The house was quiet. Only the slow ticking of the clock in the hallway filled the silence. He glanced at the photos on the shelf, new ones he wasn't part of. "You've done well," he said. "I learned to," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, maybe just realization. I poured him some tea, the way I always used to, and for a moment it felt like time had never moved. But it had, because he came back, and I wasn't the same anymore. After Daniel sat down at the table, the silence between us stretched like a fragile thread. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint tapping of rain beginning on the window pane. It felt strange, seeing him in this house again. The same table, the same chairs, but somehow everything different. Back then, this place echoed with laughter, late-night dinners, half-burned pancakes on Sundays, and music that played from the little radio we bought at a yard sale. Now it was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, just rests. I remember the first time I met Daniel. It was summer, the kind of hot afternoon where the world feels slow and kind. I was 23, working at the local library, shelving returned books and helping kids find their favorite stories. He came in looking for something he couldn't find. I think it was a collection of essays by some author I'd never heard of. He was polite, awkward even, the kind of man who didn't talk much but carried a calm around him. We started talking about books, then music, then everything in between. And somewhere between all those conversations, I fell in love. It wasn't sudden. It was soft, like sunlight creeping through a window. We went for long walks, talked about simple dreams, a house, a family, a small garden. And when he asked me to marry him under that old oak tree near the lake, I said yes before he even finished the question. Back then, love felt like the only thing we'd ever need. The first few years of our marriage were quiet but happy. Daniel worked long hours at a construction firm, and I started teaching part-time at a community school. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. Until slowly, it wasn't. I can't point to one exact moment when things started changing. Maybe it was when Daniel began staying later at work. Maybe it was when we stopped talking about the little things, the funny things that used to make us laugh. It wasn't anyone's fault, not really. Life just started happening. Bills, deadlines, exhaustion, all the small, ordinary weights that press on love until it forgets how to breathe. Then came the night he didn't come home. It was raining hard. The kind of rain that drowns sound and makes time stretch. I waited by the window for hours, the porch light glowing like a small hope in the dark. When I finally heard his truck pull in, It was past midnight. He came inside quietly, dripping wet, avoiding my eyes. "Work ran late," he said, but his voice didn't sound like the truth, and I didn't ask. Because I already knew, not the details, not the who or why, just that something between us had shifted beyond words. He slept on the couch that night. I lay awake in our bed, listening to the rain hit the roof, realizing love could still hurt even when no one said goodbye. Over the next few months, we became strangers sharing walls. Conversations turned into reminders and about bills, groceries, errands. He started disappearing on weekends, saying he needed time to think. And I let him, because a part of me thought maybe love meant waiting. Until one morning, he didn't come back. No fight, no dramatic ending, just an empty closet and a short note on the table. It said, "I need to find myself." That was it. I don't remember much of the days that followed. I went to work, came home, cooked for one. At night, I'd sit on the couch, staring at the television without really watching. People told me time heals. But time doesn't heal. It only gives you space to learn how to carry the pain differently. After a few months, I started moving again. I learned to fix the leaky faucet by myself. I took long walks by the lake, the same one where he proposed. But now I went alone. I started a small garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, basil, wildflowers that didn't mind growing crooked. It became my therapy, I suppose, watching things grow from nothing. Some days were easier. Some weren't, but the strange thing about heartbreak is it doesn't break you forever. It bends you, reshapes you, and then quietly teaches you how to live again. Differently, but stronger. After about 5 years, I stopped checking the mailbox for his letters. After 7, I stopped dreaming of his return. By the 10th year, I realized I had built a whole new life, not out of forgetting, but out of forgiving. I had friends, students who brought me flowers, neighbors who called me for advice, a peaceful little routine that didn't depend on anyone else. And then, just when I thought that chapter was closed, he came back. That day, when I opened the door and saw him again, every version of myself I had been since he left seemed to meet at once. The young woman who loved him, the broken woman who mourned him, and the quiet woman who learned to live without him. He looked at me like he was searching for something familiar. Maybe the same warmth I once gave so freely, but I wasn't that woman anymore. And as I watched him sip his tea across the table, I knew this visit wasn't about the past. It was about closure, maybe for both of us. He sat across from me, his hands wrapped around the warm mug I'd placed in front of him. Chamomile tea. The same kind I used to make when we were still married. He looked surprised that I remembered. "I didn't know if you still like this," I said softly. He smiled a little, that same half smile I remembered from years ago. "Some things don't change," he said, but I could tell. Everything had. There was a long pause. Neither of us seemed to know how to start. Finally, he spoke. "You look different, Claire. Happier. Peaceful." "I am," I said, and the words surprised even me, how true they felt. He nodded, his eyes dropping to the cup. "That's good. You deserve that." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. So I asked, "Why now, Daniel? After all these years?" He took a breath, his shoulders tightening. "I guess. I thought about this moment 1,000 times. What I'd say, how you'd react. But when I saw your face, all of that disappeared." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I didn't come back to ask for anything. I just wanted to apologize. A word I used to whisper into the dark, wishing I'd hear it one day. But sitting there now, I realized I didn't need it the way I once did. Still, I stayed quiet. I let him speak. When I left, he continued, his voice unsteady, I told myself I needed to find who I was. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of failing you. Scared of the life we built. It felt like everything was closing in. The bills, the expectations, the routine. I didn't know how to talk about it. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. So I ran. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside had grown heavier, a soft rhythm against the window. "I waited for you," I said quietly. "For years." He closed his eyes. "I know, I thought I'd come back sooner. But every time I tried, I convinced myself you were better off without me." A small, sad laugh escaped me. "That's the thing about guilt. It always feels noble when it's really just cowardice." He nodded, not offended. "Just Accepting? You're right. I was a coward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This was yours, he said. I found it when I was cleaning out my old things. Inside was a photo, the two of us, younger, standing by the lake on our wedding day. I was wearing that white sundress, and he had his arm around me. We looked so sure of forever. I used to keep it with me, he said softly, even when I didn't deserve to. I ran my thumb over the edge of the photo. You kept it all this time? I couldn't throw it away, he whispered. It was the only thing that still felt real. For a while, we just sat there, two people connected by a past we no longer belonged to. And though part of me wanted to reach out to say I understand, another part of me knew that understanding didn't mean going back. I spent a long time being angry, I admitted. At you, at myself, at everything. But somewhere along the way, I realized that anger doesn't hold people together. It only keeps them from healing. He looked up. So you forgave me? Yes, I said. But not for you. For me. He nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. I stood up and walked to the window. The garden outside was glistening with rain. The wildflowers swayed gently in the wind, bending but not breaking. When you left, I said softly, I thought my life was over. But it wasn't, it was just different. I learned to take care of myself, to find peace in the quiet, to be okay alone. He smiled faintly. You always were stronger than me. No, I said, turning to face him. I just didn't have the choice not to be. He leaned back in his chair, eyes following me like he was memorizing me all over again. Do you ever think we could have made it work? If things had gone differently? He asked. I took a deep breath. I used to think that all the time. But the truth is, we were both learning who we were. We just learned it apart. He looked down, fidgeting with his hands. I lost so much time, Claire. So many years. You didn't lose them, I said gently. You lived them, just somewhere else. He stayed for a while longer, telling me small stories about where he'd been, how he moved to another state, worked odd jobs, tried therapy for a while, how he thought of calling me every Christmas but never did. Each story was like a thread being untangled, painful but freeing. I listened, not as the woman who once loved him, but as someone who had finally made peace with who she became without him. After some time, I noticed the clock. It was nearly evening. The sky outside had turned soft orange, fading into gray. You should probably get going, I said gently. It'll get dark soon. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, you're right. He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. When he reached the door, he turned back to me. Claire, he said quietly, thank you for letting me see you again. I didn't expect forgiveness, but I think I found a bit of it here anyway. I smiled, a tired but peaceful smile. You didn't need my forgiveness, Daniel. You just needed your own. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. And then he was gone, stepping out into the evening rain, leaving only the faint smell of rain and tea behind. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. He had come back, yes. But not to stay. He came back to end the story properly, the one that had been left open too long, and maybe in some quiet way, that was love too. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that lingers after something important ends. Not empty, just different. I walked into the kitchen and saw the empty mug sitting in the sink. The same one Daniel had used the night before. For a moment, I just stood there, tracing the rim with my finger. It felt strange. How something as small as a cup could hold so much of the past. I made myself a fresh pot of tea and sat by the window, watching the sunlight stretch across the garden. The rain from last night had left tiny drops on the flowers, glistening like little memories refusing to fade. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself really think, about him. When Daniel left, I had spent years trying to fill the space he left behind. I buried myself in work, in friends, in small distractions that made me feel busy but never truly whole. I'd wake up each morning, hoping for the pain to lessen, and go to bed each night wondering if he was thinking of me too. But now, after seeing him again, the ache had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, like an old scar that no longer hurt when you touched it. I remembered the first year after he left. How I'd leave the porch light on, just in case he came back. How I'd keep his jacket in the closet, unable to pack it away. It took me almost 2 years to turn off that porch light, and another year to finally move his things into boxes. When I finally did, I cried for hours. Not because I was angry, but because letting go meant accepting he might never return. Funny, isn't it? The things we hold on to, thinking they keep love alive, when all they really do is keep us from healing. After breakfast, I went out to the garden. It was Daniel who had planted the roses years ago. Red and white, his favorite colors. They had wilted for a while after he left, like even they missed his hands tending to them. But over the years, I learned how to care for them myself. Now, they stood tall again, full of new blooms. I knelt down and touched the petals gently. "See," I whispered. "We made it. It wasn't just about the roses. It was about me." That afternoon, I took out an old photo album, one I hadn't opened in years. There were pictures of us laughing at barbecues, dancing in the living room, painting the nursery that never held a child. I paused on that one, the nursery. We had wanted children once, but life had other plans. Maybe that's where our cracks began, in the silent disappointments we never learned how to speak about. I stared at that picture for a long time. The soft pastel walls in the background, the paint still wet in the photo. We had smiled then, not realizing that some dreams never come true, no matter how much love you pour into them. Later that evening, as the sky turned golden, I decided to take a walk by the lake. The same lake where we had taken our wedding photo, the one he'd kept all these years. The air was cool and gentle. The world felt slower here, as if it remembered us too. I sat on the same bench we once shared. There was a quiet ache in my chest, not painful, just full. For the first time, I whispered the words out loud. "I loved you, Daniel." I really did. The wind carried my voice softly across the water, and I swear I could almost feel an answer, not in sound, but in peace. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I dreamt of us, not in the way we ended, but in the way we once were. Before the arguments, before the distance. Just two young souls who believed love was enough to fix everything. When I woke up, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt gratitude, because maybe love isn't meant to last forever in the way we think it should. Maybe sometimes it just changes shape. From something shared to something you carry quietly inside you, like a memory that keeps you gentle. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Daniel. My heart trembled as I opened it. Though I didn't feel fear, just curiosity, a soft sense of closure I hadn't expected. It read, "Claire, I wanted to thank you again for seeing me. That evening meant more than you know. I've spent years running from the person I was, but after that night, I think I finally understand what peace looks like. You were always the calm in my storm. I couldn't see it then, but I see it now. I don't expect forgiveness or a second chance. Just for you to know that I'll carry your kindness with me for the rest of my days. Take care of those roses. They were always my favorite part of us." Daniel, I held the letter for a long while, smiling through tears I didn't expect. Not sad tears, grateful ones. It was strange how words on paper could bring both closure and peace. That letter wasn't about rekindling anything. It was a goodbye that didn't hurt anymore. The next morning, I framed that letter and placed it on the shelf beside the photo of us at the lake. Not as a memory of loss, but as a reminder of growth. Because sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sunlight hit the roses outside. Daniel had come back, yes, but not to stay. He came to return a piece of the past I didn't realize I'd already let go of. And in doing so, he gave me something better, the quiet strength to move forward. That day, I decided to start something new. I signed up for an art class at the local community center. It was something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. As I stood in front of the canvas that first day, brush in hand, I smiled. The blank space didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. Life had become mine again. Not shared, not borrowed, not waiting. Just mine. The art class was held every Saturday morning in a small, sunlit studio near the town square. When I first walked in, I was nervous. Everyone there seemed so confident, people chatting, laughing, mixing paints like they'd done it their whole lives. But then I found an empty seat near the window. The light there was soft, golden, and familiar, like the mornings I used to spend painting little flowers on the porch railings when Daniel and I were newly married. I took a deep breath and smiled. It felt like the start of something gentle. The instructor, a woman named June, noticed how quietly I worked. She came over and said, "You paint like someone who's lived a lot." I laughed softly. "Maybe I just feel a lot," she nodded. "That's the same thing," it made me think. Maybe all the heartbreak, all the waiting, all the growing I'd done over the years, maybe it wasn't wasted after all. Maybe it had turned into something else, understanding. At first, I painted simple things. Flowers, sunsets, cups of tea. Ordinary moments. But each time I painted, I noticed how the brush felt lighter in my hand. How my heart didn't ache as much. By the 4th week, I painted something different. A house with a garden full of roses, and one open window with light pouring through it. When June saw it, she smiled gently. "That feels like peace." And she was right. It was. One afternoon, after class, I stopped by a small cafe nearby. As I waited for my coffee, I overheard 2 young women talking about love, about heartbreak, and whether people really change. I smiled quietly to myself, remembering how certain I once was that love meant forever. When the barista called my name, I took my coffee and sat outside. The air was cool, the kind that hints at autumn's arrival. I wrapped my scarf a little tighter and took a sip. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely sitting alone. I felt content. Sometimes healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments, tiny ones that barely register until you look back and realize how far you've come. For me, it was things like this. The smell of freshly brewed tea in the morning. The laughter of children walking home from school. The sound of rain tapping gently against the window. Each one reminded me that life was still happening, still offering beauty, even in quiet ways. A few weeks later, I found an old letter tucked in one of my recipe books. It wasn't from Daniel. It was one I'd written to myself years ago, a note I'd forgotten about. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly faded. "Claire, if you ever find this, I hope you're smiling again. I hope you've learned that love doesn't end just because someone walks away. It just changes. It grows inside you, and it teaches you who you are. One day, you'll look back and realize you survived something you thought would break you. And you'll be proud. I promise." I sat there, tears welling in my eyes, reading those words over and over. It was like my past self reaching out to remind me that even when everything felt lost, there was always hope waiting quietly in the background. Later that night, I took out Daniel's letter again. I placed it beside mine, his words of farewell next to my words of healing. 2 letters. 2 stories that once ran together, but now stood apart, complete, peaceful, and whole in their own way. I lit a candle, closed my eyes, and whispered a quiet thank you, not just to him, but to life itself, for teaching me that endings can be soft too. The seasons began to change. Autumn came with its crisp air and golden leaves. I started walking more, long walks through the park, sometimes alone, sometimes with my neighbor Martha. Martha was kind, talkative, and a little nosy in the way that only old friends can be. One day, as we sat on a park bench, she asked, "You ever think about seeing him again?" I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "No," I said. "Some stories don't need another chapter. They just need a peaceful ending," she nodded. "That sounds like something a woman who's healed would say." I laughed softly. Maybe it is. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the years I had spent measuring love by its presence, by how long someone stayed. But now I knew better. Sometimes love's greatest gift isn't in staying. It's in teaching you how to stand on your own when it's gone. And that realization, it didn't hurt. It felt freeing. One Saturday morning, I brought one of my paintings to the community center's small art show. It was the one of the house with the open window and the roses outside. A young woman stopped in front of it and said softly, "There's something peaceful about this. It feels like someone let go, but gently." I smiled and said, "That's exactly it." She turned to me, curious. "Is it your story?" Yes, I said, but it's everyone's in some way. Because at some point, we all lose someone we thought we couldn't live without. And at some point, we all learn that we can. That evening, when I came home, I stood by the garden again. The roses were still blooming, their petals soft against the cool air. I thought of Daniel, wherever he was. Maybe he found his peace too. I didn't feel the need to know. What mattered was that I had found mine. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I whispered softly, "Thank you for loving me once." And in the quiet that followed, I felt it, not his presence, but something deeper, acceptance. He came back, but I wasn't the same anymore. And that was the most beautiful part of all. It's been a year since that evening on the porch. A whole year since Daniel stood there, shifting awkwardly under the porch light, asking if he could come in. Sometimes, I still see that moment clearly. The way his voice trembled when he said my name. The way my heart stayed calm instead of breaking all over again. It was the night I realized something I wish I had known years earlier. Peace doesn't come from getting what you lost back. It comes from learning you don't need it anymore. Life has been quiet, but in the best way. I still wake up early, make my tea, and sit by the same window where the sunlight falls across the floor. I paint sometimes. I volunteer at the library twice a week. I call Martha when I need to laugh. The house feels different now. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. There's a comfort in living alone when you finally make peace with yourself. The silence becomes a companion instead of an echo. A few weeks ago, while cleaning out a drawer, I found one of our old wedding photos. It was taken on a warm summer day, Daniel in his navy suit, me in a simple white dress, barefoot in the grass. We were laughing, completely unaware of what life would bring. I held the photo for a moment, smiling softly. I didn't feel sadness. Just gratitude and for the love that once was, and for the strength that followed after it was gone. I placed the photo back in the drawer, whispering, "Thank you for teaching me how to grow." Because that's what it was. Really applied growth. Messy, painful, unexpected growth. Some evenings I still walk to the lake, the same bench where we once sat together. But now I sit there without searching for anything. No ghosts, no memories tugging at me. Just the sound of the water, the gentle breeze brushing against my face, and the quiet joy of being alive. It's strange how life keeps offering beauty if you're willing to see it again. I used to think my story ended the day Daniel left. But maybe it began the day I learned how to stay, even when someone else didn't. I've learned that love isn't a single chapter in your life. It's the thread that runs through all of them, shaping, softening, and sometimes breaking you just enough to let the light in, and healing. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means remembering differently. It means being able to look back without losing your breath. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever love again. I usually smile and say, maybe, if it feels peaceful. Because that's the only kind of love I want now. The kind that doesn't demand, doesn't take, doesn't leave me questioning my worth. Love should feel like coming home, not waiting by the door, and if it never comes again, that's all right too. Because I've learned how to be my own home. The roses in the garden are blooming again. This year they're brighter than ever. I like to think it's because they've finally had enough time to root deep, to grow stronger through every season, just like me. As I stand there watering them in the soft evening light, I whisper quietly, "I'm okay," and I mean it. Every word. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to my story, it's this. Sometimes the people we love come back, but not for us to start over. They come back so we can see how far we've come, and when they do, don't look at what you lost. Look at who you became, because the truth is, the version of you that survived, healed, and learned to love again in your own quiet way. That's the strongest love story of all. The evening light fades slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. I sit on the porch with my tea, the same place where everything once ended, and began again. He came back, but I wasn't the same anymore. And that's how I knew I had finally come home to myself.